Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer Mizrahi, President of Respectability, and I am so delighted that you all are with us today for what is going to be a terrific webinar on how a federation, community foundation, or United Way can support equality and inclusion throughout community agencies and beyond. Respectability is a nonprofit organization, and we do these as an educational resource for people around the country who care about people who have disabilities and people who love them and who believe in equality and inclusion. We have two terrific speakers with us today, and so I'm delighted to introduce them to you, and then I'll turn it over to them so they can give the presentation. Steve Rackett is the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, which is a mission-driven nonprofit organization dedicated to community building, fundraising to support local and overseas needs in the Jewish community, and creating bridges of understanding and support between the DC community, Israel, and Israelis. I must say that he is really quite a champion on the inclusion issues. We're absolutely delighted to work with him locally in the DC area, but he's also an active member of the Jewish Federations of North America's Large City Executives Forum, and he's a member of the Executive Committee of the Jewish Agency for Israel and Jewish Federations of North America, and he's the immediate past co-chair of the Tarrytown Group, which is an organization of the largest Jewish foundations and federations in North America. Our other speaker is Lisa Handelman, who I know well because, frankly, she was the inclusion coordinator for my child's camp and did a terrific job with children with disabilities, making sure that they were included and that they were respected and that they were really able to succeed when she was leading inclusion at a camp. But at the Washington Federation, she is the Community Disabilities Inclusion Specialist, which is a new position, relatively new position here at the Washington Federation. To my knowledge, she is the only person in the country who has this very important role. We're hoping that other federations, United Ways, community foundations, and others around the country will duplicate this role and create this kind of position in their own communities. She also works with the Department of Jewish Life and Learning, and she's worked in Jewish education and inclusion for over 20 years, including her leadership roles at the Yeshiva of Greater Washington, Sulan, the Charles E. Smith Jewish Day Schools, and at Capital Camp, where, as I said, she worked for 13 summers. Both Steve and Lisa are deeply, deeply committed to inclusion and really are setting a very high bar for how to do a very successful job at it. So I'm going to turn it over to them so that they can walk us through the exciting work that they are doing at the Federation.
Jennifer, thank you. We really appreciate you and your colleague Hillary Steen being here with us here in beautiful downtown Rockville, Maryland, at the office of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington. We're going to be talking today about inclusion. And the goal of this webinar, from our perspective, is really to start a conversation. While we're certainly making progress here in D.C., we don't do everything well. We are thinking strategically, we're trying, we're making mistakes, but really what we'd like to do is to begin a conversation, and hopefully when we open up the question and answer period, we'll get into some of the questions that you may have about the work that we're doing or the work that you'd like to do. We've divided this presentation into 3 segments because for us, inclusion is about connecting, it's about educating, and it's about empowering. In the connection bucket, we're going to be talking about the committee that we've created, the community that we serve, the website resources that we are working on, and the partners that we have in the community. Under education, we're going to speak about communication, modeling, and sharing. And in the empowering segment, it's really come down to getting others involved.
Okay, so to start this conversation, we're going to first explore why inclusion is part of the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington's mission. and Steve, why you created my position as a full-time position for Community Disability Inclusion Specialist.
Okay. The slide that we're looking at now outlines the 6 critical needs in our community. You can see we go from vulnerable population to emergency response to Israel and overseas needs, Jewish education and Jewish identity, and in yellow is creating an inclusive community. We firmly believe that an inclusive community is a stronger community, and that Jews with disabilities and their families have needs that are universal to all families. And while this quest is universal, we believe that Jewish heritage, values, and traditions all provide teachable moments and lessons for us to advance inclusion. It's also universal because 20% of us has a disability. And it's not about doing something for others, but it's about creating the kind of community in which we all want to thrive. It's also personal. And when it comes to disability inclusion, I'll share with you briefly my own story, and that is that I was born with normal hearing, and around the age of 2, I lost most of my hearing. This didn't come to a complete shock to my mother because my brother is 7 years older than I, and the same thing happened to him. We blame our grandparents because they're not around to defend themselves, but in essence, our lives changed, and I've been able to deal with this thanks to my mom and her enormous investment in me, in teaching me to speak. But from the age of 2, I began a lifetime of wearing hearing aids, paying close attention, becoming an expert lip reader, and I often quip that I can tell what's really going on in a Federation board meeting, and overcompensating in so many ways that I've lost count. I know that I'm lucky. I've benefited from technology, from patient teachers, and loving and dedicated parents. Only a few years ago, and I credit Jennifer with this, I realized that if I identify myself as having a disability, then I had a responsibility to help change the way the Jewish community addresses others with disabilities. If I was willing to change language I used to describe myself, then I had a responsibility to change communal language. And if I was willing to take action with regard to this issue, then I had a responsibility to help our community take action as well. So it's personal. It's personal to me and to those that you see on the screen. On the left, there's a picture of Fievel with a colleague of mine, Lexi. And Fievel is an employee in the Cafe, Sunflower, and Bakery, which is located in the lobby of the Jewish Federation building. Cafe Sunflower is a non-profit organization in our community that trains those with disabilities in becoming employees in the bakery industry. It was primarily a back-of-the-house operation operating out of a warehouse about 10 miles from here. But when we moved into our new building, I reached out to them and asked whether they'd be interested in opening up a cafe, which would give their clients an opportunity to learn additional skills, including being waiters and waitresses and cashiers. And we are absolutely thrilled that Cafe Sunflower is here on our premises as a powerful statement for inclusion. And Fievel, that smiling face of his is exactly the way he presents himself. He is so happy to have this job, to be trained, and his goal in life now is to go back to college and get and for a career in the food industry. It's personal for Lily, who's on that zip line right there at Capitol Camps and Retreat Center. It's about an hour north of where we are right here. And Lily is in a wheelchair. She's been going to camp for about 7 years. And just yesterday, our entire staff was up at Capitol Camps for what we call Good Deeds Day. And we helped to build a hard surface that will then be installed on top of the gravel path so that Lily can spend the summer, this coming summer, in the cool part of the camp, which is in the tents rather than in bunks. And because it's rather rustic there and near a stream, they can't pave it, as the rest of the camp is paved. And so we helped to build a hard platform for her to be able to get in and out of that section of camp, and we were thrilled to do so. And it's very personal to those who went on the inclusive birthright trip, pictured in the upper right-hand corner. For those folks, being a part of Birthright, which is such a powerful experience, now enjoyed by over 500,000 people in the last 14, 15 years, to make sure that we have inclusive experiences for everyone is a powerful and important statement.
I'm going to just jump in here and say, when I look at the picture of Lily and her friend, to me that represents really full inclusion. You don't know, seeing the picture, the backstory, but those two girls are great friends. They met at camp. They share a bunk. Lily needed help getting down the 3 steps to go across that zip line. Her friend was a little nervous about it. So in many ways, they supported each other, and it was that interdependence that they were able to do it because they had each other for support.
So, Lisa, when you started, what were the first things that you set out to do?
Okay, when I first started, and I've been in this area, as Jennifer has said, for a while, but my first thought was, what are we doing? What are we doing right? Where are the gaps? Who's doing it? And we have a lot going on in the greater Washington area. But one of the first things I decided to do was, let's figure out who we can collaborate with. So we decided to form an inclusion committee, and the committee quickly got pretty large. It's made up of professionals and lay leaders, and there's not really a clear distinction between that, because I find a lot of our professionals may have gotten into it because of a connection as a family member. A lot of our lay leaders are very professional. We have almost 50 members currently in our inclusion committee. Of that group, almost 20% are individuals with disabilities. Also in our committee, we have parents, siblings of individuals with disabilities, and we have teens. We have a small group of teens, both with and without disabilities, who are part of our inclusion committee. The next thing that we did is we reached out to the larger community, and we wanted to say, well, what's happening? Where are we, and where do we need to go? So we had an event called A Call for All, and it was here at Federation, and we invited the community, and we had over 100 people of all abilities in attendance. We had a wonderful keynote speaker. Yeshai Barth is a young man. He's pictured there. He himself has a disability, and he spoke to us about a paradigm shift and about everybody being superheroes, everybody having strengths and weaknesses, and it was a wonderful presentation. And then we broke into breakout groups to talk about what's happening and what we can do. We had one on political and communal advocacy, which Jennifer ran. We had one with the synagogues and agencies. We had a group that was adults with and without disabilities. We had one empowering teens. We had a separate group with teens. One of our youth movements had a separate group at the same time on what we should do next. We had a group for parents and professionals that work with school-age children, and we had a group that focused on employment. From all this, we decided we needed to, going back to the committee was so large that we split up into some working groups, and we had one that focused on that event, A Call for All. We also had one that focused on online resources, which is what we're talking about on this slide. We also had one that talked about thought leadership, where we need to go long term. We had a subgroup that was talking about employment, again, based from that Call for All and what we heard there, and a subgroup that was talking about technology, and we're looking into forming one about parents and parent support. So the one that worked on the online resource, we created this, and you can see a snapshot of what the online resource looks like. It has 6 buckets, and you can see the link down there. And so the community forum is a bucket that's coming soon. We're still working out some of the accessibility on that forum, but the other 5 are active now. One includes upcoming events, so if somebody in this community wants to find things that are happening, that's there. The 2 that I think are really interesting, community resources and individual resources, are crowdsourced. So the community resources are things that our community has identified and working with me that are are there to help advance disability inclusion. News articles, tools, all rich stuff, linked to other resources in the community. And the individual resources are for an individual that's organized by ages and stages, and that's for if you are an individual or a parent of an individual for younger children and you want to know what does our community offer, you can find that on the individual resources. And again, crowdsource. So as new things come or I learn new things, we add them very quickly to that site. And the last bucket is about inclusion stories, which we're going to talk about a little bit more coming up. In addition, we then expanded even more, because like I said, when I first got here, there is a lot going on here. So we reached out, and who are we going to partner with? Steve mentioned we're partnering with Sunflower Bakery, and they're in our lobby as a Cafe Sunflower. We did training with an organization called Matan, training educational directors on how to be more inclusive of kids within our congregational and our day schools. We had 17 congregational schools and 1 day school participate with the Matan training in 2014. And we worked with, when you mentioned other federations, we had some other folks that I've connected with in other federations. Jennifer said, I think we found that I'm probably the only full-time person, but we did reach out, and I found 12 other individuals who do work in some way part-time with disability included sitting at a federation. And one of the partnerships we're most excited about, and that's the screenshot you see on the slide, is we worked with the Jewish Foundation for Group Homes and have an intern for their program. And we want to just pause for a minute and let that video talk for itself about this exciting partnership.
I think to be a stronger community, it's really important to include everybody. The MOST program is a gap year program for young adults with developmental and other disabilities to get real-life work experience within the community. And we wanted to partner with them to really be leaders in this and have somebody working right here at Federation.
Casey's a young man who came to us after finishing high school entitlements, likes routine, likes to be able to be independent, and is learning all of those skills here at Jewish Federation.
I restock copy stations. I make sure the copiers are filled with the correct kind of paper. I think I've improved on being more qualified to work in the working world than I was before I joined.
The impact that we're having on their lives is huge.
Casey's worked out really well here, and we're so proud of him. He's really proud of his job, and it shows in other ways.
This is his first internship, his first job, the beginning of a path that I think is going to be very successful. I think it's been very good for us here at Federation to have an individual like Casey working with us. When we work together as a community, we can do so much more. And I think the Federation is very well positioned to be that collaborator.
Why don't we move on to the slide, and when we send this out afterwards, then perhaps we can send a link to the video. It's an excellent video and a good example of how working with partnerships can make wonderful things happen in the community. I want to point out this slide, slide number 10. On our website, there is a short but we think very powerful statement that says the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington welcomes the participation of interfaith couples and families, people of all abilities, backgrounds, and sexual orientations. That statement in and of itself does not make an organization inclusive. And we should never feel that putting statements or putting out press releases does the job. But without the statement, then one can question the investment that an organization is making. And so we're urging our agencies and synagogues to put these kinds of statements up there so that we can aspire to live up to the statements that we do put out there about ourselves.
When we started thinking about the website, we had to ask ourselves, is our website accessible? And to be frankly honest, that wasn't something I had thought that much about before I came to this position. And we looked at our website and we weren't sure. And we knew it wasn't where it needed to be. So the steps we took is we did an audit of the website. And what it means to be accessible is somebody with a disability, somebody who has a hearing loss or is deaf or somebody who is blind. Can they access the content? Is the content clear? Is the content easy to navigate? It's all, most of what's on in terms of accessibility, you and I as a user, if you're not using a screen reader, can't necessarily see it when you look at a website. So we had it professionally audited, and then we're starting to making all those changes. I believe within the next week or so we should have most of our changes made. If the video that you just saw is closed captioned, that's one of the changes that will happen on all our videos. And then we said we have to then communicate this. Like Steve was saying, you have to do it and then you have to tell people you're doing it, partly because you want to model, you want to share, you want to encourage others. And you can see the language on the side is what we're playing with, is language that will appear once it's fully accessible. And so because we think it's very important to not just do it, but say we're doing it. So the language says, our developers are constantly working to improve the accessibility and usability of our website, and we're going to strive to follow certain standards to make sure that our website is designed and function for accessibility.
When we advertise our upcoming event, we always put the language that you see on this slide, which is building an inclusive community as a priority. We strive to accommodate all needs whenever possible. Advance notice is required. Please contact us and we will make every effort to meet your needs. Simply saying that has resulted in people saying, not only is that nice, but I really appreciate the invitation to tell you about a need that I have that I normally would not have told you about. So simply putting that language there is the first step, but then the most important step is making sure that your staff that's involved with the event is aware and is able to accommodate as needed. So we have sign language interpreters often. We employ CART technology, which stands for Communication Access Real-Time Translation, which is in that left-hand picture there, that the speaker has a CART screen behind the speaker, which is real-time translation going on. The accommodation is part of the registration process, and we urge people, and we are getting more and more people to say, I'd appreciate a seat up in the front. I'd appreciate a wide enough aisle for my wheelchair to get through. I'd appreciate a sign language interpreter, whatever the need may be. We have a hearing aid loop in our conference area, and we make sure that people are aware of that service as well.
Yeah, one thing I just want to jump in here with, when we see that the phone number is up there, that was actually when Steve was mentioning at the beginning, we're in a process, we're learning, we're getting some things right and getting things wrong and making changes. The first change we did for accommodations, it was on our registration form. So if you went to sign up for an event, you saw a prompt that asked you if you want to make accommodations and listed possible accommodations, and on the registration form it gave you a phone number. And there were basically, through conversations with individuals with disabilities, folks said to me, you got to put the phone number up front, because if we can't access for whatever reason your form, your registration, we still want to be able to call in. So the phone number has worked really well, and like universal design, that was one thing nice about it. It wasn't just helping individuals with disabilities. So one of our big events, Ruth, somebody who wasn't as comfortable using technology, actually an older gentleman in this case, called that phone number and came in and registered for the event in person because he wasn't as familiar using technology. So we learned by talking and working with people, put the phone number up front, have somebody knowledgeable on the other end to answer the phone, and go from there in addition to putting it on the registration forms.
Communication. It says right there in the front, keep talking. I've learned this probably best from Jennifer Mizrahi, who is a persistent and powerful voice, reminding all of us that we can do better. We blog about inclusion articles. I've written a number of articles. I have a weekly email that goes out to about 37,000 people in our community. I use the opportunity to remind people about the importance of inclusion, to talk about it at meetings, to make sure to include it in speeches, to bring the conversation to the community in ways that it makes sure that inclusion is included. It makes sure that it's not the province of the advocates only, but it's all of our responsibility as a federation and in the Jewish community, synagogues, agencies, in the general community. Every organization, every institution needs to be thinking about this because, as I said in the beginning, it's not about someone else. It's about each and every one of us because as we age, our hearing, our sight, our mobility, our memory will all be challenged. And so we are helping to create, we believe, a community that we all want to live in.
And I think Jennifer, you asked us, what's our signs of success? How do we know when we put these things together that we're being successful, we're helping to advance inclusion? And when I thought about your question, I think when it really starts to change is when it starts to happen organically within an organization. When inclusion is not my role, when it's not the job solely of the person who is in charge of disability inclusion. So here on the screen we just have some examples. So PJ Library, which is in our building, and the Sarah who works on it has her desk right near me for Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month, created educational materials with this lovely book called The Mitten String that has a character in it who's a young lady who's deaf and her friendship with this little girl that you can see in the picture. And she created educational materials, and we also had the book video being signed using ASL, and that's available. So communities that have never had a chance to see that can go through PJ Library and do that. But Sarah owned that. That was her project. Jewish Food Experience, which is another thing that happens actually across the hall here, and that you go to that website and you can see articles about cooking classes for individuals with disabilities, involvement, and that's completely, I had nothing to do with that, and that's happening completely organically on their website. We talked a little bit, I've met people, but they own that. And then Good Deeds Day, as Steve was mentioning, as a staff, we did some good deeds that were definitely connected to disability inclusion work. But the whole event shifted from being an event sometimes where you would do things for a group. Philosophically, it's now an event when we have things that involve disability inclusion, it's with individuals that have disabilities. So nobody's going to Foundation for Group Homes to do for them, they're going there to do with them. And this picture is actually at the Hebrew home, and I remember they were sorting food, and everybody was involved in that. It's very much a collective Good Deeds Day. And there's other little things, like we've done the video that we were showing you with our intern here, Casey, who's absolutely wonderful and has really changed us all by being here. We really feel blessed to have him with us. When we first interviewed him and several candidates. Our HR director did that for the first time, but now feels empowered, and she said to me, if you know of other organizations that are going to interview individuals with disabilities, they can use me as a resource. She did it once, now she's ready to do it for others, and that, again, sort of happening, that empowerment. She interviewed, not me, she's the HR director, that was logical. I've been asked to work with young leaders. There's a group that wants to do, when we talked about the blogs, that's also on the website, the stories that Steve mentioned that he's writing. I have 3 individuals I spoke to the other day that they came up with the project, and I'm helping them, but I didn't create that. They came up with it. And I'm also working with a group from Women's Philanthropy that asked me just the other day, we want to focus on this. Can you help us do it? And when you asked that question originally, that's for me what the signs of success are, when it starts to go out and move from there.
So that wrapped up our presentation. There's Lisa's picture of her smiling face and her contact information. I mentioned at the beginning that we wanted to get a conversation going, and so we'd like to open this up as soon as possible to all of your questions or comments. Once again, we're happy to be here. We're happy to be moving ahead in this important work. By no means are we getting it all right. It is a learning process, but we're very proud of the steps that we've begun to take, and we look forward to doing even more in the future. Jennifer?
That's really terrific, and I look forward to seeing what the questions are. Operator, why don't you go ahead and let folks know how they can ask a question. I know we have more than one way that people can ask a question.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you have dialed in and would like to ask a question, press 7# on your phone now, and you will be placed in the queue in the order received. You can also type in your question, right, operator? Yes, that is correct. You can also send questions using the chat window located to the left of the presentation screen.
Excellent. As people are starting to type in their questions, and I hope that you do type in your questions or that you get in the queue to ask them, I'm going to start by asking Steve Rackett, because he is the CEO of an organization whose primary mission is to raise money to help support other nonprofit organizations. So for those of you who are not in the Jewish community, the Jewish Federation plays a role much like United Way does or a community foundation does as an umbrella organization that raises money for the collective good. So some would see potentially that doing an inclusion initiative would be off task for an organization whose primary mission is raising money. So what are your thoughts on that, Steve? And how has this impacted your ability to raise money for the organization?
I think I would probably change the characterization in that our primary mission is to build community. And we do that through a number of ways, including raising significant funds on behalf of the community. And so when you look at it that way, inclusion is very much central to the kind of community we want to live in. And when people look to Jewish Federations and they look at our role in the community, they ask us, what kind of a community do you want to build? And what we're saying by having inclusion so much a part of our operation is that we want to live in a community in which every member of the community feels included. And that extends well beyond the disability arena. We mentioned on our website statement earlier that it's about interfaith couples, it's about people of different sexual orientations, it's about newcomers that come and are looking to build community. So we think that it's strengthening our hand in our ability to raise dollars because we have a mission, a vision for the kind of community we want to live in.
Thank you, Steve. I want to point out in answer to the first question that the PowerPoint will be available online and you can absolutely use it. Additionally, we do apologize for the technical glitch in the video, and you will be getting the link to that video, which does have captions. Additionally, I'd like to apologize to the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West New Jersey, which has had an inclusion coordinator for 7.5 years now, and there is an additional 4 to 5 federations with professional staff in this field. As Lisa mentioned, that there are a dozen federations actually that at least have a part-time person. What's so particularly strong is that this is a full-time position here working in Washington with all the different agencies. It works with the day schools and the synagogues and the camps and the JCCs and all the other very broad plethora of organizations, and that is the sole mission of that. And also, you're right, the child who is typically a wheelchair user who is on the zip line obviously was not using her wheelchair on the zip line, but typically she does use a wheelchair. So that's just to clarify that. And I do, again, apologize that there was a technical difficulty in the video. Now, we got a very specific, excellent question from Gary, who asked, does your organization have a proper line item budget for reasonable accommodations throughout the year? And I'm wondering also, can you comment on whether any of the agencies also have an accommodations budget or within their agencies?
That's a great question, Gary. No, we don't yet have a line item that says accommodation. we build it into our budget. We make sure that hiring that interpreter for the deaf or making sure that cart technology is available happens. Sometimes you just do it and you think about it later. I think as we move on in this business, we probably will be able to quantify that and set aside a line item budget. But for now, we don't have one.
And when you asked about Jennifer asked other agencies, if you go on the website that we said, we have a list that we, again, starting to form and getting more information from all our congregations. We have a list online that lists which congregations provide accommodations, and there is a line on there about ASL interpreters. And a lot of those synagogues that check that box are making that accommodation themselves. So I had an interesting phone call from a synagogue that wasn't checked, and somebody said, well, how do I do this? I said, well, start by asking your synagogue, and if they're not sure, they can look at the list and see who else is doing it. And the end of that story was they did reach out, they talked to a couple other congregations, and they made the accommodation. And more I'm finding agencies are, I don't know if they're doing line items, because I didn't ask them about their budget, but they are making the changes, finding the money for the accommodations where they need it.
There is a question, how many of your professional staff have a disability?
I'm smiling as I'm reading that question because at a conference that we were at together about 3 years ago, right, Jennifer? That same question was asked of me. I was on a panel, and I had paid attention during the presentations, and one of the speakers talked about the fact that not all disabilities are visual, not all are obvious. And so my first answer was, I don't know. Right now, there are 4 members of our professional staff who have a physical disability that is clear to everyone. But I don't know how many more there are that have a disability that might be dyslexic, that might have something that they have not yet come to us and said, I need an accommodation. But we're trying to message that very clearly to them and to all new employees that if there's anything we can do to make your professional work experience enjoyable, we will do that for them.
Susie asks, I'm working on inclusion for adults, and I find it quite difficult. We have much younger and much older volunteers and friends, but I find it difficult to connect to 20s and 30-year-olds with their peers.
It's interesting, Susie, that you mentioned that one. When I mentioned, again, in terms of partnering and empowering others, there is actually a group of young professionals I'm working with here on exactly that question. Where are the young professionals? How do we reach out? How do we find them? How do we interact more? It goes a little bit, I think, what Steve was saying, how many people do you have employed? We're yet, as a society, a lot of the individuals that I'm meeting are working really hard, unfortunately, to sometimes hide the fact that they have a disability. They're not necessarily want to be out there as poster children, so to speak. And so I'm finding that generation, sort of the college age into young professionals, a little bit hard to engage with, but I'm starting one-on-one, have coffee, have conversations, collect the stories, use them as my experts, find out what people want and what they really need, and never assume for them, and I'm finding that works, but it is a slow process to build that up.
Now, there is a question about the accessibility of the PowerPoint presentation, and I just want to point out that it is accessible to people who are blind, so that there are, for people who use screen readers, they're able to access this, but not everybody knows how to do that with PowerPoints. And so we have a webinar on our website, and I just want to point out that the Respectability website is up there on the screen now. It's respectabilityusa.com resources/Jewish inclusion. One of the things that's on there is our webinars, and that we have one of my co-committee members from the Washington Federation, Dana Marlowe, did a terrific session on how to make websites accessible, and we have another presenter that talked about how to make documents accessible. And I want to be sure that you know that those are on there to help you in your own goals as you are making your own documents accessible. And you got a lovely question from somebody who was in the PowerPoint just a little bit, and so, but I accidentally just covered up the question, so it'll just take me a second to get it. Feivel asks, I just want to say I was not expecting to be in the presentation, but I want to know that I am joining the Inclusion Committee and the Employment Team. What exactly, if I join, will that mean?
Okay, and he and I have talked a little bit, and back to the other question when you said, how do you engage 20 and 30-somethings or young professionals? A lot of it is building those relationships. So Feivel and I have talked. He works at Sunflower Cafe. We have a committee that's interested in how do you advance employment of disability, inclusion of individuals with disabilities within our community. How do we do that sitting at Federation? Jennifer's done a lot of work with her organization, sort of the legal and the government and that level, but how do you do it to person, and what role does our community? We need to talk to the young people that are being employed. So Feivel and I have talked about, he's going to be one of our experts. He's going to help me with that employment committee figure out what do we need to do? What do we need to do that we're not yet doing so that he and other individuals like him can go on and find the jobs they want, find the social activities they want, and be fully integrated in the community. And like Steve said at the beginning, we don't have the answers yet. We're learning from each other. And I'm so excited. He recently joined our committee and our team, and it's going to be wonderful to have you along with us.
I want to say that, we're all building and we're all learning this in real time, and we're really sharing ideas with one another. And when I think, this is Jennifer speaking about how I got into the inclusion business, it's really a presentation that I heard where I heard Linda Berger and Joan Alexander speak, and they're both from the Houston Federation. And in Houston, the Jewish Family Services, which Linda Berger runs, has been doing a terrific job at inclusion in Houston in so many ways. One of the differences about how Washington is doing it, however, than how it was set up in Houston, I think, and we'll have to do a webinar later with Linda because she's really just such a guru in all of these, is that what they're trying to create here at the Federation is that it's more holistic, that all of the agencies should be inclusive of all people with disabilities, whereas in Houston, because they started way earlier, where there was more of a tradition of sort of segregated institutions, you have more these separate events and the separate institutions for people with disabilities. Since Washington was a little bit behind in having institutions, it doesn't have as much of sort of the legacy of some of the separate events because they're doing it now for the first time. And so as they build it from the ground up, they're doing it holistically within the larger institutions. But I must say that a huge amount of my personal inspiration comes from Linda Berger and Joan Alexander and the work that was done in Houston, Texas. Gary asked, why do so many Jewish organizations resist inclusion and refuse to provide accessibility and accommodations despite once-a-year token disability awareness months?
Great question, Gary. My experience has been that most people resist because they think it's all about money. And they say, I don't have the money to make my organization accessible, therefore I can't even deal with it. So that's one possible response. But as what we're trying to do is to change the culture and the conversation. It's not about building the ramp. It's about creating a culture whereby we ask each other, are we being accessible enough? What more can we do? Everything is on a continuum. Nothing is black and white in this particular realm. So I know exactly what you're saying, Gary. I've seen some of that resistance, but when I've probed, I've seen that I've learned that the resistance often comes from a concern that this is going to cost way more money than we possibly can afford. Therefore, we really can't deal with inclusion. That, I think, is a false binary equation. That's not the way it works.
Yeah, I also found, Gary, that some congregations see themselves already as being welcoming, and they don't really yet know who's out there. If close to 20%, if not more, individuals have disabilities, if those individuals are not in our preschools, in our after-school programs, in our youth groups, in our sisterhood, then we haven't done enough. And I think a lot of what we were doing, we're working on a little bit on a self-assessment kind of tool that really looks at who's there. And if they're not there, as much as we think we're welcoming, we got to do more. and it's a part of learning from each other.
Yeah, by the way, let me pick up on the self-assessment tool because I don't think we covered it today. We're in the final stages of developing an online self-assessment tool that we're going to pilot with about a half a dozen organizations and then open it up to the entire community. And it's done, so to speak, in the privacy of your own organization. You assess yourself and where you are on the issue of inclusion. It's not publicly available. It's not to embarrass anyone. It's essentially for organizations that want to take the next step. And once they assess where they are, then we can provide suggestions for that next step. But shaming any organization, I don't believe, is a way to go about this. I think what it takes is building a culture of inclusion and accommodation, and then those who want to take that next step, we want to give them the tools to be able to do so.
And let me add on to that, that a lot of people don't know what they don't know. So there is a tremendous number of incredibly well-intentioned lay leaders and professional leaders in the community. And by the way, not just the Jewish community, because when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, the law exempted all religious organizations. So whether you're Catholic or Muslim or Protestant or Jewish, all faith-based organizations were exempted from the Americans with Disabilities Act, except for some of the employment pieces, which are the non-discrimination pieces, or if they're getting money from the government, which would come with its own ties. So this is across the community. They don't know what they don't know. So frequently I've been with different faith-based organizations, and they say, well, around the Jewish holidays, or if they're Christian, around the Christian holidays, we have a separate event for children with disabilities, for example, and maybe 3 times a year they have this separate event. And they think because they're having an event for people with disabilities that therefore they're inclusive. What they don't realize is that the Sabbath happens 52 times a year. 52 times a year there is a Sabbath, and if everybody else is going to their congregation's Shabbat service or Sunday church service, why shouldn't the individual with a disability participate in an equal way as everyone else? So frequently it takes a lot of education to get people ready for this entire process. So this is a really important thing. And I see that we have so many questions backing up, though. So let me move on to the next question. Hold on. Okay. Lisa wanted to jump in.
I want to jump in. I'm just looking at Gary mentioned something about a Human Rights Commission questionnaire, and Metro West in New Jersey did a wonderful questionnaire. So when Steve's mentioning our self-assessment, we're learning and we're building on. I use both those tools to create something that's unique for our community, and what we put together won't be the answer for every other community. I've talked to people in New York. They want to see what we're doing. So the idea is we do more when we do it together. And I think when we learn from each other and we figure out how to do it, that's where it really makes a difference.
Right. And I will also say that the Chicago Community Trust has developed a terrific toolkit of how to become inclusive, and it walks through everything. And that on the Respectability website, if you go to this Jewish inclusion page, there are some toolkits that you will find incredible resources. And I'm on the inclusion committee here at the Federation, and we've done quite a lot of assessment work with the New York Jewish Federation on synagogue inclusion, for example, and we've done it with the Foundation for Jewish Camp, and that we've had an opportunity to reflect on the survey instrument that they're doing here at the Washington Federation, or the Jewish Federation of Greater Washington, which I think is really very helpful. And there's a lot of other questions, but we're getting pretty limited on time. And so I do want to point out that all of these resources are online, and that we do have my information right there of how to reach out to me. This is Jennifer Mizrahi. You have my email address, and you also have Hillary Steen, who I'd like to personally thank for her leadership in helping coordinate all of our webinars. We have a number of other webinars coming up. The next one that's coming up is with Erica Steen from the DC Jewish Community Center, who has a terrific teen program for kids with and without disabilities to do community service work together. That's the next webinar that's coming up. I also want to remind you that Lisa Handelman, she has her email right here for how you can contact her with other questions. I know that there was a question about how other agencies can get involved and cross-pollinate with one another. That we do see a question about that. Can you answer, Steve, how other agencies, whether they're, Leanne was asking about cross-pollinizing when you have one agency that has a level of expertise towards something, how they can provide a resource towards other agencies within sort of your ecosystem within a community.
Absolutely. We're only a phone call away, and so I would suggest that offline we connect with one another, and Lisa will be in touch with you, and we will make sure that you are engaged and involved and are part of any of the discussions that we're having in this area.
So I can add a little bit to that. One thing we also did here, which I'm not sure I mentioned, is that we had two roundtables, and we invited all the congregations in the area to come to the roundtable. We had about 35 congregations that came, and they just shared ideas. And we also had one for agencies, and we had 16 of our agencies come and share ideas. And when I mentioned the website being crowdsourced, a lot of that is connecting people. Like we said at the beginning, it's about communicating, connecting, and building those networks.
Right, and I will say that I'm seeing that Linda Berger from Houston is actually online with us, which is fabulous. She's going to send us a Devar Torah that she gave on this a few years ago on this topic, and actually I think I'd like to put that online too so that that can be a resource, and I'll put her contact info because she really is a wonderful leader. We have some really wonderful leaders within our community that are working on these issues, and so we'll continue to bring webinars to you on topics that we hope will be helpful. So if you're on the line and you find that there's other issues that you find very challenging and you'd like to have webinars on, I hope that you will not hesitate to reach out to us and ask us for help. Steve Rackett and Lisa Handelman, I want to thank you so much for this extraordinary opportunity to sort of open a window into this exciting new dimension that you brought to the Federation world here in Washington and that is setting up a model for other cities around the country. I want to thank you for the work that you're doing every single day. So thanks for being with us, Steve and Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you for those of you who are on the line with us today. Operator, this concludes our call.